I have officially fallen into the monster romance, monster smut rabbit hole. He's written for the romance girlies because Indy is a romance girly. Like, oh, I'm getting excited talking about it. Hold on. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back. My name is Viry for those of you who are new here. I know it's kind of late in July, but at some point I was supposed to get my June reading wrap out. So here we are. Welcome to my June reading wrap where we go over all the books I read for the month of June. I do not have those books with me right now because they are in my bookshelves. A good chunk of them were also library books, so obviously those have been returned. Another side note, I'll probably try to edit this out, but just in case there's a little buzzing noise in the background, I am trying something new with my camera. I put on a cooling device so it doesn't overheat so fast, especially since it's summertime. My camera doesn't last longer than 20 minutes recording. One last side note, a lot of these books that I read, when I wrote the review, I actually did not do my in-depth book reviews like I've been trying to do. So a lot of them are just like vibes, basically. So these reviews might not be too detailed, and that's okay. We're still going to talk about whether I like these books or not, which is ultimately what most people want to know. Anyway, that's enough chit-chatting. Go ahead and grab a drink, get cozy, and let's get started with our reading wrap. So in total this month, I read 10 books. 5 of them were paperback or hardcover, and the other 5 were Kindle reads. And then out of the 10 total books, I had audiobook help for 4 of those books. The first book that I picked up for the month of June, or well, technically it was the second book. We discussed this in my last reading wrap, but the first book starting off this reading wrap is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I read this in physical format, and I did have a little bit of audiobook help with this one. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5. This is a thriller book, and because it is a thriller book, I'm going to keep the summary pretty short. So the story follows Casey, who has been spiraling for months after the death of her husband. So in order to help her, her mom sends her to their house at the lake. Casey honestly would have been content with drinking her problems away until one day she comes across a famous model that she saves from drowning and completely changes the trajectory of her life. So overall, I went into this book somewhat blind. I knew a little bit about this book, like the whole concept of there being something going on with the house across the lake, but I didn't know anything other than that. I had no idea what kind of thriller I was reading, but that's usually how I prefer to read my thrillers, so I don't see any of the plot twists coming. From the beginning, it kept me hooked because I had no idea where the story was going. I genuinely wasn't sure what we were following until maybe like halfway mark when things were starting to make a little bit more sense. It was a fun book. It was a fun read. It was a little bit spooky and it was entertaining. It just didn't blow me away because I already had a little bit of high expectations going in reading another Riley Sager book, since the previous one I read I had given a 5-star. That's a little bit on me, but I still did enjoy myself reading this book. One of the reasons why I picked up another Riley Sager book is because the atmosphere of these books is eerie. There's just something spooky about his writing that kind of gives me chills when I read it. Exactly what I wrote about his writing, I put, it feels like there's a constant sense of gloom hanging over everything. If you like atmospheric books, I feel like he has really good writing. What I liked the most about this book was definitely the plot. I think it was its strongest points. It felt unique, and the plot twist, genuinely did not see it coming. And honestly, it might be because I didn't have an expectation of what kind of thriller I was reading that I actually enjoyed the direction it went to. And then it didn't really help that I would read this book at night, so a lot of the reveal that happened felt a little bit extra spooky. I keep using the word spooky. I will say the reason why it wasn't higher than a 3.5 was that after the initial shock of the reveal, it kind of started to feel a little bit more predictable. And then another reason why the rating is not a 4 is because I couldn't really connect to the characters that much. They didn't really stand out. There were too many extra characters that kind of were just there, and I didn't understand their purpose for being there. This story definitely is more plot driven for sure than character driven, so because of that, we don't focus too much on the characters. We know the basics of what we need to know in order to get a story out of it, but we don't know what makes the characters tick. And then on top of that, Casey was very frustrating. She was very impulsive and didn't think things through. However, I feel like that's her character. She was supposed to be a very frustrating character. Considering that she was going through so much, it makes sense why she was spiraling and doing all these things that just, as an adult woman, it does not make sense to be doing to begin with. I'm just like,
why? Why would you do that?
But yeah, overall, most of the characters felt very like surface level. We didn't really touch on anything. And then Ellie. I can't remember if it was Ellie or Eli. That side character specifically was the one that stood out the most, even more than Casey, our main character, just because of how well he handled everything that was thrown at him. Like, I was genuinely impressed by him not questioning anything. He's just like,
yeah, okay.
Like, he'll be shocked, but then kind of just roll with the punches. And I'm just like,
cool. You're a very interesting character. I kind of wish I knew more about you.
So overall, I had a good time with this book. The characters didn't overly impress me, but the plot was still entertaining enough where I enjoyed reading the story. 3.5 out of 5. It was a fun thriller if you like atmospheric, creepy books. So the book I picked up after that was Two Can Play. Actually, I don't know if I want to count it as a book because it's technically a novella, but this is by Ali Hazelwood. I read this in hardcover, and this was just like a cute rom-com. I gave this a 4 out of 5 with a spice rating of a 2 out of 5. So I'll give a quick summary. Viola is a game designer who's determined to develop a game based on her favorite novels, and she has the opportunity to do this, but first she has to be able to get along with their rival gaming studio company. In particular, Jessie, another game designer who has not given her the time of day, and she actually kind of does not like. It does follow a story between Viola and Jessie and just them trying to learn more about each other, navigate working with each other and whatnot. So overall, this was a fluffy, enjoyable novella. It's exactly what I was looking for after reading the thriller that I read. I've mentioned this multiple times before, but Ali Hazelwood books can feel very copy and paste at times, and this is no different, but I do take my time in between Ali Hazelwood books so then I can enjoy them a lot better. This definitely has that same formula: stoic male, quirky female main character, takes place in like a STEM setting environment. And honestly, I actually preferred this novella format because I feel like it went straight to the point. I feel like Ali Hazelwood is one of the queens of miscommunication. She loves that trope. She uses it in all of her writing that I've read so far. And because this was a novella, there was miscommunication, but it was resolved really quickly and there wasn't unnecessary drama. Everyone was pretty upfront and the story wrapped up really quickly and it was sweet. So Viola, she's really the only character we go into depth, which makes sense because this is a novella. We don't have a lot of time to really get to know other characters. While she doesn't have like a terrible relationship with her family, it also isn't the best relationship. However, we do get to see glimpses of her relationship with her dad specifically because she was very close with her dad. If this had been a full-length novel, I would have loved to explore that part of her relationship. I thought it was very interesting and it really shaped who she was as a character. We got enough about the character Viola and it still made me care about her. Jesse, on the other hand, was very book boyfriend coded. His feelings definitely leaned towards insta-lovey, insta-lusty. We didn't really get to see much depth for his character. He was mainly just there to be the love interest. With that said, I really appreciated having that bonus chapter at the end with his perspective because it made me feel like Jesse was a little bit more of his own character instead of just being there to be obsessed with Viola. So final thoughts, this was overall a fun, quick read. I enjoyed my time. It was cute and fluffy. It was the palette cleanser I was looking for. And good vibes all around. The next book I picked up was A Soul to Keep by Opal Rain. This was a romance, but specifically it was a monster romance. I read this in paperback and I had some audiobook help with this and I rated this a 4.5 out of 5 with a spice rating of, I didn't write it down, I'm going to say 3.5 out of 5. Something like that. Because it was like monster smut basically, it definitely needs a higher rating because it's not your average smutty book. So this story follows Rhea, who is labeled as the bad omen of the village. Because the village sees her as a bad omen, she is the obvious choice to sacrifice to the Duskwalker in exchange for protection wards for the village. So this happens every 10 years or so. However, Rhea quickly finds out that the Duskwalker, Orpheus, is more than what he seems. I have officially fallen into the monster romance, monster smut rabbit hole. And honestly, I am not mad about it. I feel like this was a really good introduction book into that genre. I think humanoid alien romances might be a nicer step into like monster horror subgenre, but you know what? I was curious. This has been on my TBR for a while and I was curious, okay? I did not know if it was fully monster. I did not know if it transformed into a monster. I didn't know, right? So I finally picked it up and it was fun. I had fun. It was a good vibe. If you like anime, it definitely gave me the Ancient Magus Bride vibes, but make it spicy. Orpheus was honestly my favorite part of the book. Orpheus as a character, I really liked him. I really appreciated his point of view. Having his specifically really helped us understand the level of knowledge he had about human interactions and human culture. I think I have Charro hair on me. He's definitely the looks terrifying but is a teddy bear kind of person thing appeal. Hear me out. I really liked his innocence, his curiosity, because while he was like a very smart being, like I mentioned, he didn't have a lot of knowledge of human culture, which was what brought his curiosity out and what made him want to understand Rhea more. Because of that, everything he does is perceived as scary, but that's all because of his appearance. I really enjoyed seeing him learn about humans and develop his feelings with Rhea. It was just super cute. Really liked it. And I liked that while he was a teddy bear, he still had his characteristics of being a monster. So like telling her like, don't run because it's going to trigger my prey instinct, or like don't bleed basically because I'm gonna end up eating you. And I'm not talking about the schmexy eating. I'm talking about like chomp. I'm gonna eat you whole. I still feel like talking about smut, saying the word eating is not like the correct word. Who lets me do these reviews? Anyway, moving on. Rhea is definitely a strong female main character. I really did like Rhea as a main character. Oh my god, Charro is shedding everywhere and I swear I have Charro hairs on my face. I did like Rhea because she felt realistic in the sense that she was cautious. Obviously, she was going to be scared to a certain extent, but she was cautious and didn't immediately trust Orpheus, which makes sense. He is a monster, so it's kind of just like,
okay, dude.
but we didn't create unnecessary conflict just for the sake of the plot. So I really appreciated that because I feel like in a lot of these kind of like monster alien romances, that tends to happen where there's this deep hatred rooted in the female main character. They just like really hang on to it because that's all they know, and it just creates this unnecessary conflict. Rhea definitely was cautious, but as she learned more about Orpheus, she opened up more. And because of that, I feel like their relationship did not start like, oh my god, insta-lovey, insta-lusty. It actually developed from like friends, curiosity, kind of wanting to get to know each other, to something more romantic. This was definitely more character driven. We are not too much plot driven. We don't focus on the world building too much. Magic is just magic. Like if things happen there, it's just because of magic. The creation of Orpheus is very interesting and it's a little bit complicated, but at the end of the day, the answer is magic. And I kind of like that because then it lets us focus on the romance and the relationships between the characters rather than the world building. So this is definitely a romance book in a fantasy setting. I had a really good time with this book. I'm definitely going to be continuing the series. I'm very curious because we got to know another one of the Duskwalkers. So I do want to keep reading the series. I really enjoyed myself. Good book, 4.5 out of 5. So the book I picked up after that was My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney. I read this in paperback and I did have some audiobook help with this one. This is a thriller and I gave this a 2.5 out of 5. So this is when my book reviews start to like turn more in towards 5s. Bear with me because this is a thriller. I won't give too much information about what the story is about. This story follows Eden, who one day goes on a run, comes back from her run only to realize that her key to her house does not work. So she knocks at the door waiting for her husband to open, only for a woman that looks almost exactly like her, just a few years older, to open and claim to be Eden, the wife of her husband. So I will say this book started off strong. I was very curious about it. And then eventually about a third of the way through, it kind of changed plots, it kind of changed paths, and it lost me a little. Once the plot shifted somewhat, we had like it wasn't even a plot twist, but once the plot shifted, a lot of the plot holes started to arise. And honestly, I didn't notice them at first. I noticed them at the end of the book when I finished everything and I'm just like,
wait a minute, this doesn't make sense.
I guess the ending is what didn't make sense because of that. And then the plot twist also just didn't make sense. There were too many questions unanswered. And I know it's a thriller and sometimes you do want to leave it kind of open-ended at the end or something like that. It just didn't make sense. There was too much happening. There were too many like plot twists kind of like being checked off, and it was starting to get bigger and bigger, like it snowballed into something massive, and it ended up being something so big to the point where the ending was rushed and it didn't give any closure to the story. It was just not that great. I did not enjoy it that well. Overall, I feel like it had a good premise. It just wasn't executed well, and I just ended up feeling kind of disappointed at the end. My camera's gonna die, so let me switch my battery. I'll be right back. After a bit of a flop of a book, I went to an author that I know would give me a good time, and that's Ashley Poston. I picked up Sounds Like Love. I read this on paperback and I gave it a 4 out of 5. And then for Spice, I put 2 out of 5, I think, question mark, because I reviewed this book maybe like 3 weeks after I read it. So I could not remember how spicy it was. And if I'm being honest, the spice, the smut, it's the first thing to leave my mind. So this story follows Joni, who is a famous songwriter, but is burnt out and currently has writer's block. So she decides to go home because she also has some family issues going on. And she goes back to the small beach town she grew up in. And everything's going fine until a melody got stuck in her head, and she is also starting to hear someone else's voice in her head. That turns out to be Sebastian Fell, a former boy band heartthrob. Joni and Sebastian can hear each other's thoughts and are in each other's heads, so they can feel what they're feeling and whatnot. And yeah, it follows a story about Sebastian and Joni trying to navigate this thing that's happening between them, learning how to get out of it, and getting to know each other. It's a romance between the two. One of my favorite things about Ashley Poston books is the bit of magical realism that we get. It's still primarily a romance book, but there is always a little bit of magic sprinkled in there. I really liked the concept of the main characters hearing each other's voices. I feel like it made it extra special. They genuinely would understand how each other was feeling, so there was not really enough room for miscommunication. So this book does explore themes on grief, the family issues that Joni's going through. Her mom has dementia or Alzheimer's. I can't remember which one, but it's one or the other. It could be a little bit heavier because of those topics. Grief, not necessarily death, but like the grief of like losing someone slowly and stuff like that. So it has like its sad moments. That's why like the romance and the connection between Sebastian and Joni is so sweet and so heartfelt, because it balances the sadness of the book. Another thing I found kind of interesting was the family dynamics of Joni and Sebastian. They both were going through family issues. However, it was completely different family dynamics, because with Joni's family, everyone loves each other. She has a good relationship with her family. Her parents are in good terms. Like, they're happy with each other. They're just going through this really heavy thing that's making them all struggle. While with Sebastian, it's more of a broken family. I don't like using that term. His mom has passed away. He does not get along with his dad, and there's just issues revolving like the family dynamics before that as well. The contrast between them was so interesting, because people coming from two completely different types of family still can struggle throughout life, because nothing's ever perfect. And like I said, the romance itself was super cute. The characters were really cute. We did have some depth for Joni and for Sebastian, which made the romance feel even sweeter. And then obviously the connection with that little like bit of magic in their lives was also very heartwarming. I feel like they had really good chemistry once they started to get to know each other. One of my favorite moments, I didn't write the quote down because I couldn't find it and I returned the book, but one of my favorite moments was when Joni was trying to get Sebastian's attention, but he was being surrounded by a bunch of fans and stuff like that, and you could see that Sebastian was starting to feel overwhelmed and whatnot, and everyone was calling his name, but Joni knew his personal nickname because that's what Sebastian asked Joni to call him, and so he used that name, and instantly Sebastian looked around and saw Joni and like was able to find her and stuff like that. I thought that moment was so cute. So moments like that were just so sweet. They just hit a little bit harder. I really liked it. And then I did write down a quote. This one was one of my favorite quotes from the books. It says, "Mom was right. Grief was a love song in reverse. The notes were still there, but they sounded a little different." It was just so cute. I really liked it. Very cute moment. Overall, this was a sweet, cozy summer romance because it does take place in the beach and like summertime. It was just a good summer book to read as well. It was emotional without it being overly heavy or like bordering on more like literary fiction. It still definitely focused a lot more on the romance. It just had a subplot going on as well. Good time, fun vibes. just really do enjoy Ashley Poston's writing. The book I picked up after that was Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. I read this on my Kindle. This is a memoir, and because it is a memoir, I am not going to rate it. I don't feel comfortable rating biographies or memoir. I don't like rating people's life stories. This memoir is obviously Bethany Joy Lenz. She was the former actress for Haley that comes out in One Tree Hill, and it's basically the story of her life being in a cult and also being an actress for a very popular show. I'm going to keep this one pretty short. I don't have too much to say. I wanted to read this memoir after I finished watching One Tree Hill. I watched it all for the first time. I ended up getting the book on Libya a lot sooner than I thought I was going to get it, so I actually read the book while I was in the second to last season of One Tree Hill, and it definitely made me see the show with a different perspective because you cannot tell that this woman went through things. When I read the book, I didn't realize that literally her whole career as an actress for One Tree Hill basically was while she was in a cult, and how that really impacted her and her relations with her co-stars and her opportunities and just in general, her and her mental health and how she kind of like navigated all of that. It was very impressive, honestly, and it made me respect her more as an actress because she really took her role and immersed herself in that role, that she became Haley and nothing that was going on in her life really affected her. Maybe you could see some stress here and there, but I don't know if that was the show adapting to maybe how Bethany Joy Lenz was kind of like navigating life in the moment, but you really would have not known if she did not come out with this memoir. It was very interesting. And also, Bethany Joy Lenz's writing is very good. Like the way she tells a story, she really kept me engaged. She really took me through everything and like made me feel a lot of things for her. And she just had a really good voice when it comes to writing as well. And yeah, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting memoir if you're interested. So after that, I picked up The Right Move by Liz Tomford. I read this on my Kindle. This is a sports romance book, and I gave this a 4.75 out of 5. If you know me, it's very rare that I give quarter ratings like that. And then I did give it a spice rating of a 3 out of 5. It definitely focuses a little bit more on the spicy parts of the romance, even though it's still very much a romance book. It's not like a smutty book specifically. So this is the second book in the Windy City series. This story follows Indy, who moves in with her best friend's brother Ryan after Indy's long-term relationship ends and she has nowhere to go. Conveniently, it works out for Ryan to ask Indy to be his fake girlfriend because the general manager for the basketball team that he is in does not think he knows how to have a work-life balance, and so Ryan is trying to prove him wrong with a fake girlfriend. It basically just follows the story of Ryan and Indy, and it's like a fake relationship trope. They're living together, so forced proximity. I'm so glad I continued the Windy City series. I did mention how I enjoyed Mile High, but I wasn't overly impressed the way people make it out to be. So far, what I really like about Liz Tomford's writing is her characters. She does a really good job of making them multi-layered. They feel like real people because they have these flaws. It's not just all insta-lovey, insta-lusty. And I think my favorite thing about the characters is that we get to learn more about them while they are learning about each other, which really helps grow their relationship and makes it feel real. Ryan is again very book boyfriend coded. He is definitely written by a woman. He is almost too perfect, but that's exactly what I want. He's written for the romance girlies because Indy is a romance girly. Like, oh, I'm getting excited talking about it. Hold on. There was like a phrase, I don't think I wrote down the quote, but his form of love is a quiet love because he is very much a acts of service kind of love language. So he just does little things for Indy to like make her feel comfortable, make her feel loved. Literally getting her a bed with purple sheets because that's her favorite color was so sweet. Making her coffee in the mornings and putting it in the fridge because she only drinks cold coffee and wakes up after him was also such a sweet moment. Like everything Ryan did was so freaking cute. Oh, he's so sweet. He's so sweet. I love him. He definitely top book boyfriend material. And then Indy was also another very interesting character because she has to rebuild her whole life after this breakup with her ex, because her whole friend group, they all grew up together and they all know each other. It's very messy, very intertwined with her previous relationship. So it was kind of expected of them to like get married and whatnot. So like Indy finding her boyfriend cheating on her was very hard for her because not only did she lose her boyfriend, but she lost her future that she envisioned for herself, and she lost her community as well. Seeing her character have to learn to rebuild her whole life definitely gives opportunity for good character development, and it just made it that much more satisfying for Indy to find a community that really accepted her and loved her for who she was. One of my favorite moments, again, I don't think I wrote down the quote, but it was Indy's dad giving Ryan a sign name because that meant that he was special to the family. I don't know if that was a spoiler, but that was so cute. That was so freaking cute to me. Like, genuinely the sweetest thing. Because Ryan also learned ASL, so he would be able to communicate with Indy's dad. Ryan was just like perfection. Maybe a little bit too perfect at times, but again, he was made for the romance girlies. I really like this book, a 4.75 out of 5. I almost gave it a 5, but it didn't feel quite like a 5. It did give me such cute like butterfly feelings and stuff like that. So the book that I picked up after that was another Kindle book. Originally it was a library book. It was La Vie de Guinevere, but I ended up having to return it, so I ended up reading it on my Kindle and it got a new title. I don't think it changed too much from the original indie version, but it was The Once and Future Queen. I also had a lot of audiobook help for this one, if I'm being honest. It was maybe half audiobook, half reading it on my Kindle. And this is a fantasy historical fiction kind of romance book, and I ended up giving this a 2.5 out of 5 with a spice rating of a 1.5 out of 5. So this story follows Vera, another average 20-year-old something who is approached one day by a man, basically upends her life and tells her that she is Queen Guinevere of Camelot. Her memory is needed in order to save the kingdom. I was very excited to read this one. Did I say who it was by? Paula Laforetti. Yeah, like I was super excited to read this one, but personally I was just not very interested in it. I actually ended up getting kind of bored, and the audiobook was the only reason I actually finished the book. So I feel like the premises would caught my attention because it definitely has Outlander vibes of this girl in the future going to the past and like living her life in the past. It is inspired by the Arthurian legend. And yeah, I mean, I did really like the concept of a lost queen ending up in the future, but I just got bored with it. The plot was kind of interesting. Eventually, when we found out how Vera ended up in the future, it kind of lost me there a little bit. And then on top of that, a lot was happening. There were so many scenes, so many moments that were happening, but the plot was not really moving along. So I feel like all of these scenes were to help develop the relationship between Vera and Arthur, the king. I just couldn't connect to the characters, so I wasn't really sold on the romance that much. And then because of that, like the pacing of the book just kind of dragged. It was really slow, especially in the middle. I was just not really interested. Like I said, too many unnecessary scenes. The book definitely focuses a lot on character and romance, and I just was not there. I'm sorry. It could have been that I was in a slumpish mood, but I just didn't feel it. But to end this review on like a good note, I will say that while I did not feel the romance between Arthur and Vera, I did really like the friendship between Lancelot and Vera. I think Lancelot being there actually for Vera constantly and like supporting her and helping her understand different things and all of that was super sweet. I actually really preferred the scenes of Lancelot and Vera, and I'm not talking about in a romantic way. As friends, I really like them a lot. I feel like their relationship was a lot more wholesome and their connection felt a lot more real compared to Arthur and Vera, where they were relying too much on their past in order to get them together. But yeah, that was The Once and Future Queen. So after that, I picked up Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. This is a thriller and I read this on my Kindle. I gave this a 3 out of 5. Because it is a thriller, I'm going to keep the information at a minimum. This story follows Libby, which is kind of funny because I got this book through Libby. But the story follows Libby, who at 7 years old, her whole family was murdered by her brother while she was hiding away. And so now, as an adult, years later, she has run out of donation funds to live on and is trying to make some money. So in order to do so, some true crime fanatics basically are hiring her to discover more about the case of her brother because they believe that her brother might be innocent. And so now she is questioning everything that happened that night her family got killed. So this story, it could be that it's been a few weeks as well that I read it. It could be that it was kind of dark because like when I do think about it, it was definitely darker, more gory, but I might have blocked a lot of it out because I don't have too much memory about it. It was a little bit of an intense book. So for characters, Libby, our main character, really confused me. At first, I really was thinking that Libby had not fully mentally developed. She stayed with a very kid-like mentality because of the trauma that she experienced. And this was mostly because of her inner monologues, the way she would think. She didn't want to get a job. She wanted to keep living off donations and stuff like that. But like, girl, same. I would, if like I didn't have to work, I probably wouldn't work either. But just in general, like her thought process and stuff like that sometimes felt very kid-like. And I thought it was because we were supposed to see that Libby just never fully like mentally developed properly because of the traumatic experience that she went through when she was 7. But as the story progressed, we saw that Libby was a very capable adult woman. She was able to kind of get all this information and stuff like that. Libby's character confused me for that reason because I felt like we were kind of like shown one thing but then also shown another thing, and it was just kind of hard to figure out who she was. Yeah, it was a very interesting book. I feel like the overall story leans towards like darker topics. It is very gory as well, especially the end. At the same time, the plot twist was kind of surprising and a little bit confusing as well. Like some of it was predictable while the other part was just like, what? I don't even remember if we had a little bit of information to see the plot twist coming. That might have been just because like it could have been a red herring. I don't know. It was very interesting though. It was a good book. I was entertained. I don't really have much to say, but yeah, good story. Enjoyed myself. Also, I didn't give this one a spice rating, but there was some sexual content that you should be aware of. A lot of like talking and stuff like that. So I'm not gonna give it a spice rating, but definitely not appropriate for kids or anything like that. Okay, and then the last book I read for June. So this one actually was a special book because the author reached out to me and sent me a blurb of this book and asked if I wanted to read it, and I said yes. So she sent me the book and I was able to read it on my Kindle. So this was gifted to me by the author, and that is The Vow by Barbara Avon. This is a sports romance and I gave this a 4 out of 5. And as for spice, I gave it a 0.5 out of 5 because it was more of a fade to black moment. So this story takes place in the 90s. It follows Pip, who is a boxer, and one day he's at a bar when he sees this girl and he's instantly attracted to this girl. Her name's Alex. He is kind of trying to get at her, finds out that she is a struggling writer, and decides to give her an opportunity of a lifetime. Basically, he will give her a place to live, pay her and whatnot in exchange for her to write a love story about them. So like I said, this blurb definitely caught my attention. I was just
Like, okay, I'll give it a try. This is an indie author. I like to support indie authors when I can.
I've mentioned this a couple of times, but if you're new here, I don't usually gravitate towards sports romances. I've been reading a little bit more sports romances because I am in a sports romance kick at the moment. So yeah, I don't usually gravitate to this kind of subgenre, but I was interested. I haven't read a boxer sports romance in a while, and it took place in the 90s, so I was excited to see what the setting was going to be like. The story actually ended up being a lot more emotional than I expected it to be. It leans more towards drama. It does explore topics of grief and loss. Because of these topics, it kind of gave the characters a little bit more depth. We understood more about why they were the way they were, and it just made the characters feel a lot more real. For the writing style, normally this is not my preference. I'm not usually one to read this kind of writing. However, I was very impressed by the romance story being fully in the male main character's perspective. It was all in Pip's point of view. I have only read one other romance book that does that. It's not typical to read a romance book in the male's point of view. Maybe in a dual point of view, which we had a slight dual point of view, but for the most part, it was just all in Pip's point of view, and I thought that was very interesting, a very good take to it all. I think overall it was definitely very emotional, very heartfelt. I enjoyed my time reading this story, and the third act, I'm not going to lie, really got to me. and the ending actually made me tear up because it hit really close to home. I definitely could relate to some things, and it just was very, very emotional for me. Even thinking about it, it kind of gets me a little bit emotional, but I really did like that. It was definitely some representation that we normally don't see in romance books, and it gave a little bit of hope at the end. That gave me a little bit of hope at the end as well. So yeah, I definitely did enjoy my time, and I want to give thanks to the author for reaching out to me and letting me read your book. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. And that concludes our reading wrap. 10 books, here we are, we're done. But my camera is going to die, so let's wrap it up. Let me know down in the comments below, what did you read for June? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already and you would like to, please subscribe. I usually make book content, and now and then I make some lifestyle vlogs. But thank you all so much for watching. Have a beautiful day and happy reading. Bye!